Here's something they never tell you about being a gladiator. Most of you didn't want to die. And more surprisingly, most of you didn't. The sand beneath your feet is hot, almost burning. 50,000 Romans are screaming your name, but through the narrow eye holes of your helmet, you can barely see them. Your opponent circles you, net in hand, trident gleaming. He's faster than you, lighter, more agile. You're weighed down by armor that could save your life or seal your fate. In the next 10 minutes, one of you will raise a finger and beg for mercy. The other will stand over him, sword ready, waiting for the crowd to decide. But here's the twist that would shock most modern observers. The loser will probably survive. You see, Hollywood got it wrong. The Roman games weren't mindless slaughter. They were business. And you, the gladiator, were an investment worth more alive than dead. Your owner paid perhaps 3 years of a soldier's salary to buy and train you, kill you off in Beninsides. Your first fight, that's throwing money into the sand. This changes everything we thought we knew about the arena. Yet knowing this doesn't make your situation any less terrifying. Because while most gladiators survived individual fights, very few survived long enough to grow old. The math was simple and brutal. Fight 20 times with a 1 in 10 chance of death each time, and the odds catch up with you. Most gladiators died between ages 20 and 30, their tombstones recording careers of 5 to 34 fights before the final loss. So how did men end up in this life, walking the razor's edge between celebrity and slave, fortune and death? The answer involves betrayal, bad luck, desperation, and in some cases, a choice so strange it seems almost incomprehensible. Over the next hour, we'll descend into the true world of Roman gladiators, a world far more complex and surprising than the movies ever showed. We'll meet the man who refused freedom 4 times to keep fighting, discover why Rome's most famous gladiator never actually fought in the arena, and learn why some gladiators were literally too valuable to kill. This is the real story, drawn from tombstones, training manuals, imperial decrees, and the archaeological remains of the schools where death was taught as a trade. The gladiatorial games didn't begin in the Colosseum. They didn't even begin as entertainment. They began at funerals, in the dirt, as human sacrifice dressed up in ceremony. Picture a wealthy Roman funeral in the 3rd century BC. The mourners have gathered, the body has been prepared, and now comes the moment when the dead must be honored properly. The belief was straightforward but chilling. The spirits of the dead needed blood. Not animal blood from cattle or sheep, but human blood, spilled violently, poured into the earth where the deceased would be buried. This wasn't considered murder. It was considered duty, obligation, religious necessity. The Latin word for these funeral games was munera, which literally translates to obligations or gifts to the dead. The first recorded gladiatorial combat in Rome happened in 264 BC at the Forum Boarium. 3 pairs of men fought to the death at the funeral of Junius Brutus Pera, organized by his sons as the final honor their father deserved. The fighters were likely prisoners of war or slaves purchased specifically for this purpose. They battled with swords and shields while mourners watched, and when the blood soaked into the ground, the religious obligation was fulfilled. The dead man's spirit could rest, satisfied by the offering. But then something unexpected happened. The Romans discovered they enjoyed watching. What started as solemn religious duty began to evolve into spectacle. Wealthy families competed to host the most impressive funeral games, not just to honor their dead, but to impress the living. By the 1st century BC, these events had transformed completely. Julius Caesar sponsored games in Sciences, 65 BC, featuring 320 pairs of gladiators, all dressed in expensive silver armor. His political opponents complained bitterly about the cost, calling it wasteful and excessive. But the people of Rome loved Caesar for it, and that was the point. The games had become political advertising, a way to buy votes and popularity with blood. Here's where the story takes another turn. When Augustus became Rome's first emperor around 27 BC, he understood the game's true power. He absorbed gladiatorial combat into the state system, transforming it from private funeral entertainment into official public policy. The games were now scheduled around religious festivals, celebrating military victories, marking significant imperial events. They were no longer about honoring individual dead relatives. They had become instruments of empire, tools for controlling the masses through entertainment. Give the people bread and circuses, the saying went, and they won't rebel against their rulers. This transformation meant that by the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, gladiatorial combat had become one of Rome's defining cultural features. More than 350 amphitheaters were built across the empire, from Britain to North Africa, from Spain to Syria. Each one represented a massive investment, employing thousands of workers and requiring constant maintenance. The empire was quite literally built around blood sport. And all of this, every stone of every arena, every fighter who entered the sand, traced back to those original funeral games in 264 BC, when 3 pairs of men died to honor one dead aristocrat. Now comes the question that defines everything else. How did men actually become gladiators? The answer reveals one of ancient Rome's strangest contradictions. The most obvious path was captivity. When Roman legions conquered new territories, they captured thousands of enemy soldiers. These prisoners of war represented a valuable resource. Some were sold into agricultural slavery, others sent to mines or construction projects, but the strongest fighters often ended up in gladiator schools. A captured Thracian warrior, a Germanic tribesman, or a Gallic soldier already knew how to fight and kill. They had combat experience, physical conditioning, and crucially, they had already faced death on the battlefield. From a business perspective, they were ideal candidates. Training them to fight in a specific gladiatorial style was far easier than teaching combat from scratch to someone who had never held a weapon. The second path was criminal punishment. Roman law made clear distinctions between different types of condemnation. Some criminals faced damnatio ad gladium, literally condemnation to the sword. These individuals would be executed in the arena during midday spectacles, killed by trained gladiators in what amounted to public executions disguised as entertainment. They had zero chance of survival and would die in their first appearance. But other criminals received damnatio ad ludus, condemnation to the games. These men would be sent to gladiator schools for training. If they fought well and survived long enough, they might eventually earn freedom. The distinction between these two sentences was enormous. One was immediate death, the other was possible survival. The third path came through the slave markets. Household slaves who proved difficult to control, or who were simply young, strong, and expendable, might be sold to a lanista, the owner-operator of a gladiator school. Based on records from contracts and price lists, we can estimate that a healthy young slave suitable for gladiator training might cost between 500 and 1,000 denarii, roughly equivalent to 1 to 2 years of a Roman soldier's salary. Once purchased, these men had no choice in their fate. They belonged to the ludus, the school, and would fight according to their owner's commands. Many gladiators were marked with permanent tattoos, a common Roman practice for ins, slaves that served as both identification and a deterrent to escape. But here's where the story becomes genuinely bizarre. The fourth path was voluntary. Free Roman men, citizens with legal rights and social standing, actually chose to become gladiators. These individuals, called auctorati, signed legal contracts binding themselves to a gladiator school for a fixed period, typically 4 or 5 years. In exchange, they received a substantial signing bonus and the promise of prize money for victories. Why would anyone do this? The evidence suggests several motivations. Some were drowning in debt and saw no other way to pay off their creditors. Others were former soldiers who knew no other trade and found civilian life unbearable. A few appear to have been genuinely drawn to the fame and excitement, seduced by the roar of crowds and the possibility of celebrity. By the 1st century AD, these free volunteers made up perhaps 1 in 5 gladiators, a significant minority. But the decision came at a terrible cost. When a free man signed the gladiator contract, he took an oath recorded by the writer Petronius, to be burned by fire, to be bound in chains, to be beaten, and to be killed by the sword. This oath, the Sacramentum Gladiatorium, meant accepting total submission to the Lanista's will. The volunteer became, in legal terms, a slave. He lost the right to vote, to hold office, to testify in court, to legally marry citizens of good standing. Even if he survived and won his freedom, the stigma would follow him forever. Roman society would always see him as someone who had voluntarily sold his dignity, who had chosen to become property. This created the central paradox of gladiatorial life: social death combined with potential celebrity. A successful gladiator might become famous, his name graffitied on walls across the empire, his image appearing on pottery and lamps, women sending him gifts and love letters. Yet that same gladiator could never fully rejoin respectable society. He was simultaneously the lowest of the low and the most celebrated of entertainers, a contradiction that defined his existence from the moment he entered the ludus until the day he died or won his freedom. If you survived your first day as a gladiator, whether you arrived in chains or signed a contract voluntarily, you would find yourself standing inside a ludus, a gladiator training school. And immediately, you would understand a fundamental truth. This place was designed to break you down and rebuild you as something new. The most famous ludus was the Ludus Magnus in Rome, built by Emperor Domitian in the late 1st century AD. It stood directly beside the Colosseum, so close that an underground tunnel connected the two buildings. Gladiators could walk from their cells to the arena floor without ever seeing daylight, without facing the crowds, experiencing nothing but stone corridors, until the moment they emerged into the roar of 50,000 spectators. Archaeological excavations have revealed the tunnel entrance, 22 feet wide, designed to move multiple fighters and animal cages simultaneously. The Ludus Magnus could house more than 2,000 gladiators. At its center was a practice arena, roughly 2/3 the size of the Colosseum's main arena, complete with seating for about 3,000 spectators. This public training area served dual purposes. It allowed Romans to preview fighters before they entered the real arena, turning practice itself into entertainment. And it reminded every gladiator that they were always being watched, always being evaluated, always performing, whether they fought for real or not. But when practice ended, gladiators returned to their cells. Excavations at the Gladiator School in Carnuntum, Austria, discovered in 2011, revealed that these schools functioned as fortress prisons. The compound had high walls, a single heavily guarded entrance, and small rooms arranged around the central courtyard. Each cell measured roughly 10 to 15 square feet, barely large enough for a man to lie down. No windows, stone walls, a small mat or bed, a few possessions kept in alcoves. This was home. The daily routine began before dawn. A lanista, typically a former gladiator who had won his freedom and invested in training the next generation, oversaw everything. Under him worked the doctores, specialist trainers who taught different fighting styles. A Dr. Murmillo trained heavily armored fighters, while a Dr. Retiarius taught the techniques of net and trident. These trainers were, based on what we know from various sources, highly skilled professionals whose expertise could mean the difference between a gladiator's survival or death. Training was relentless. Gladiators spent hours running, jumping, practicing with weights made of stone and sand-filled bags, wrestling, and performing countless repetitions of basic combat movements. They trained with wooden weapons called rudes, deliberately made heavier, then real weapons to build muscle strength. When you finally held an actual gladius in combat, it would feel lighter and faster because of months practicing with the weighted training sword. The wooden weapons also prevented serious training injuries, which mattered enormously because a wounded gladiator couldn't fight and couldn't earn money for his owner. Now here's a surprising detail about gladiator nutrition. Analysis of bones from gladiator cemeteries, combined with ancient Roman texts, reveals they ate a largely vegetarian diet. Barley formed the staple, supplemented by beans, lentils, and dried fruit. They received so much barley that Romans nicknamed them hordearii, barley men. This diet wasn't about deprivation, it was strategic. The high carbohydrate meals added a layer of subcutaneous fat that could provide some protection against sword cuts without significantly impeding movement. Successful gladiators likely received additional food as rewards, and accounts mention gladiators being given meat, wine, and other delicacies after impressive victories. Medical care was surprisingly sophisticated. Gladiators represented expensive investments, purchasing a slave, feeding him, housing him, training him for months or years cost thousands of denarii. Owners wanted to protect that investment. The ludus typically included an infirmary staffed by a medicus who specialized in treating combat injuries. The most famous gladiator doctor was Galen of Pergamon. He spent years treating wounded fighters at a school in Pergamon before becoming personal physician to several Roman emperors. Galen wrote extensively about wound care, surgery, and treating injuries caused by different weapons. His experience with gladiators made him arguably one of the most skilled trauma surgeons in the ancient world. Despite the medical care, regular meals, and even the camaraderie that developed among the fighters, they called themselves the Familia Gladiatoria, literally the gladiator family. Life in the ludus was harsh beyond measure. Discipline was absolute. Minor infractions earned beatings. Serious violations meant execution. Gladiators lived under constant surveillance, forbidden to leave, unable to see families if they had any, isolated from normal society. The combination created a strange psychological environment, where deep bonds formed between men who might be forced to kill each other. Some became lovers. Graffiti from Pompeii suggests gladiators were considered highly attractive despite their low social status. Celadus the Thracian makes the girls sigh, reads one wall inscription. Another declares a gladiator to be suspirium puellarum, the size of girls. The hierarchy within the ludus was rigid. New recruits, called tyrones, started at the bottom. As they survived fights and gained experience, they advanced through ranks called palus grades, eventually reaching prime palus if they proved exceptional. A prime palus gladiator was a master, someone who could teach others, whose refined skills came from years of survival. These veterans commanded respect, received better treatment, and served as living proof that survival was possible, though rare. The Romans didn't just create gladiators. They created a combat system as sophisticated as chess, where every piece had specific moves, weaknesses, and ideal opponents. When trainers at a ludus evaluated a new recruit, they were looking for more than just strength or speed. They were trying to answer a question: which fighting style will keep this man alive long enough to make us money? A tall, heavily muscled man became a myrmillo, named after the Greek word for a type of fish. His helmet bore a distinctive fish fin crest and completely enclosed his head with only a grill across the face. This provided excellent protection, but severely limited peripheral vision and made breathing difficult. Imagine fighting while suffocating, your world reduced to what you could see, through narrow slits. He wore a manica, an arm guard of layered linen and metal plates, a metal greave on one leg, and carried the scutum, the massive rectangular shield used by Roman legionaries. His weapon was the gladius, the Roman short sword designed for stabbing. A murmillo fought defensively, waiting behind his shield for his opponent to make a mistake. The secutor was purpose-built to fight one specific enemy. His name meant pursuer, and every aspect of his design reflected his singular goal: defeat the retiarius. His helmet was completely smooth and rounded like an egg, with tiny eye holes, no decorative elements, nothing for a net to catch on. But this meant the secutor could barely see and could barely breathe. Fighting as a secutor meant operating on the edge of oxygen deprivation. Your strategy reduced to close the distance quickly before you pass out from lack of air. And then there was the retiarius, the fighter who made the secutor necessary. He wore almost no armor, no helmet, his face exposed, just an arm guard and shoulder protector. His weapons were a weighted net, a long trident, and a dagger. The strategy was elegant. Entangle the opponent in the net, use the trident's reach to stab from a safe distance, fall back to the dagger only in emergency. Many Romans considered the retiarius the lowest form of gladiator because he fought like a coward, without honor, without armor, using tricks and distance rather than brave face-to-face combat. Yet retiarius versus secutor was one of the most popular matchups, creating a David and Goliath dynamic that audiences loved. The Thrax took his name and equipment from the Thracian warriors Rome had conquered. He wore a distinctive helmet with a griffin design and carried a small square shield that allowed quick movement but provided limited protection. His weapon was the Psycha, a curved sword sharp on the inside edge, designed to reach around an opponent's shield. The Thrax was aggressive, offensive, constantly attacking, commonly matched against the heavily armored Murmillo. There were others, the Hoplomachus modeled after Greek hoplites, carrying a spear for range advantage. The Democharis fighting with two swords, one in each hand. The Equus who fought on horseback. The Provocator who wore a breastplate and fought only against other provocatories in what Romans considered the most honorable, equal contests. Here's the crucial point. These weren't arbitrary categories. Each type was designed to create specific tactical matchups that would be exciting to watch. Heavy armor versus light armor. Reach versus close combat. Defense versus offense. The variety meant gladiators needed to understand multiple fighting styles, to adapt their approach based on opponents, to constantly study their craft. A Murmillo, who only knew how to fight a Thrax, would be helpless against a retiarius. Survival meant studying your potential enemies as carefully as you trained your own. Techniques. The equipment was decorated, crests, engravings, painted shields, but beneath the spectacle was deadly functionality. These weapons killed. This armor saved lives. Every piece had purpose, and understanding that purpose meant the difference between standing over your opponent and dying in the sand. The building we call the Colosseum wasn't originally called that at all. Romans knew it as the Flavian Amphitheater, named after the dynasty that built it. The name Colosseum came later, likely derived from the Colossus of Nero, a massive bronze statue that stood nearby, depicting the despised emperor as a sun god. Even in death, Nero's ego cast a shadow. But here's a detail that changes how we understand this monument. It was built with blood money. When Emperor Vespasian ordered construction to begin around 70 AD, he funded it largely with spoils taken from Jerusalem during the First Jewish-Roman War. Roman legions had sacked the Jewish temple, carried off its treasures, and enslaved thousands of the city's inhabitants. According to traditional accounts, many of those enslaved Jews were forced to build the arena where they and others would later die for entertainment. The Colosseum literally rose from conquest, each stone representing Roman military dominance. Vespasian chose the site deliberately. Nero had built an enormous pleasure palace called the Domus Aurea, the Golden House, complete with an artificial lake right in the heart of Rome. After Nero's suicide and the civil war that followed, Vespasian drained the lake and announced, "Where Nero took land from the people for his private pleasure, I return it to them for public entertainment." It was brilliant political theater, positioning the new dynasty as champions of the people against tyrannical predecessors. The scale still impresses 2,000 years later. The elliptical structure measured 189 meters long, 156 meters wide, and stood nearly 50 meters tall, roughly equivalent to a 12-story modern building. It could hold between 50,000 and 80,000 spectators, with typical attendance around 65,000. Imagine that many voices combining into sound like continuous thunder, the entire structure vibrating with their cheers. The outer wall consisted of 3 stories of arches adorned with columns, topped by a 4th story with supports for the velarium, a massive awning system operated by sailors from the Roman Navy who managed the complex rigging that controlled the fabric canopy, protecting spectators from sun. Seating was rigidly organized by social class, turning the building itself into a physical representation of Roman social hierarchy. The emperor and vestal virgins occupied the best seats at ground level. Senators sat in the first tier, the equestrian class in the second, ordinary citizens in the third. At the very top, 50 meters above the arena floor, stood women, slaves, and the poorest Romans. This arrangement meant everyone had a view, while constantly reminding them of their place in society's order. 76 numbered entrance arches, still visible with Roman numerals carved above them, allowed efficient crowd management. Different social classes used different entrances and never mixed. The complex circulation system could reportedly fill or empty the entire amphitheater in just minutes, a feat of architectural planning that modern stadium designers would recognize. But the real innovation lay beneath the sand. Emperor Domitian added the hypogeum, a vast underground network that transformed the Colosseum from impressive to extraordinary. This subterranean level contained holding cells for animals and gladiators, storage rooms for weapons and equipment, and a sophisticated system of winches, pulleys, and elevators. Trapdoors in the arena floor could open suddenly, with animals or scenery rising up through them on platforms. The underground corridor connecting to the ludus magnus meant gladiators could arrive unseen, emerging suddenly from beneath the sand into light and noise. The Colosseum represented the peak of Roman engineering. 100,000 cubic meters of travertine stone, held together with 300 tons of iron clamps, incorporating arches and vaults that distributed weight efficiently. The exterior's orderly progression of Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian columns demonstrated both engineering knowledge and aesthetic sophistication. This wasn't merely a slaughterhouse, it was a statement of imperial power, saying, "We can build anything, house multitudes, stage spectacles that defy imagination, and we can afford to use it just for your entertainment." Now we return to that surprising fact from the beginning. Most gladiators didn't die in the arena, at least not immediately. Understanding why reveals the cold economic logic beneath the blood and drama. The afternoon games began with trumpet blasts. Gladiators entered through the Porta Senativiaria, the Gate of Life, already armored, weapons selected. They paraded around the arena, displaying themselves to the crowd, allowing spectators to see whom they'd bet on. Then came the probatio armorum, the testing of weapons. The editor sponsoring the games would have blades inspected to ensure they were sharp and functional. This wasn't ceremony, it was quality control, preventing fraud and ensuring genuine combat. Matches were overseen by a summa rudis, a chief referee, and his assistant. These officials carried long wooden staffs and wore distinctive clothing marking their authority. They were usually retired gladiators who understood combat intimately. They could stop fights to allow rest, separate entangled fighters, or end matches if one opponent was clearly defeated. Their decisions were generally respected, though occasionally angry crowds objected to rulings they disagreed with. Here's what modern research has revealed through analysis of inscriptions, tombstones, and ancient records. During the 1st century AD, about 1 in 10 gladiatorial fights ended with a death. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, this increased to roughly 1 in 5. These numbers tell an important story. Gladiators were expensive investments. A well-trained fighter might cost 2,000 to 3,000 denarii, approximately 6 years of a legionary soldier's salary. Training took months or years. Medical care was expensive. Kill your gladiators in their first fights and you'd bankrupt yourself. The business model required keeping fighters alive. Contracts between Lanastai and game sponsors often specified that if a gladiator was killed, the sponsor would pay the full purchase price, potentially 50 times the rental fee. This created powerful financial incentive for mercy. Even spectators understood this economics, which influenced their decisions about who should live or die. A typical match lasted 10 to 15 minutes, though some reportedly continued much longer. Fighters would circle, test defenses, look for openings. Blows would be exchanged, parried, countered. The crowd roared at near misses, gasped at successful strikes, cheered clever tactics. Music played throughout, building tension during crucial moments. Evidence suggests gladiators were trained to wound without killing, to make combat entertaining while conserving energy and minimizing mortal danger. When one fighter was clearly defeated, he could request missio, mercy. He would drop his weapon and shield and raise his index finger. The editor would gauge crowd sentiment. If the gladiator had fought bravely, shown skill and courage, entertained the audience, the crowd might wave handkerchiefs or shout for mercy. Graffiti from Pompeii records specific matches where defeated fighters were granted missio, suggesting this happened frequently enough to be worth commemorating. The exact gesture for mercy remains debated. Contrary to popular belief, we're not certain whether thumbs up meant life or death. Some scholars believe a closed fist signaled mercy, while an ponisesa, extended thumb of any kind, indicated death. What's clear is that crowd sentiment mattered enormously, and editors who consistently made unpopular decisions faced public anger. If mercy was denied, the defeated gladiator would kneel and expose his throat or neck. The victor would deliver a death blow designed to be quick, a thrust to the throat or between shoulder blades. Attendants dressed as Dispater, god of the underworld, would verify death by touching the body with a hot iron. If the gladiator flinched, proving he still lived, the victor would finish the job. Bodies were dragged through the Porta Libitonensis, the gate of death, while fresh sand covered the blood. But death came in other forms too. Infections from wounds killed many gladiators days or weeks after victories. Analysis of bones from gladiator cemeteries shows evidence of serious injuries that healed, suggesting effective medical intervention, but also chronic health problems from repeated trauma. Most gladiators, if they survived training, lived to their mid-20s, young, even by ancient standards, when life expectancy was already low. The survival statistics create a mathematical inevitability. Fight once with a 1 in 10 chance of death, and you'll probably survive. Fight 10 times, and the odds are roughly even. Fight 20 times, which many successful gladiators did, and death becomes increasingly likely. This explains why tombstones record careers of 5 to 34 fights. Some gladiators lasted longer than others, but eventually, almost inevitably, the odds caught up. Now meet the men who transcended their chains to become legends. Spartacus is history's most famous gladiator. Yet ironically, he's remembered not for arena victories, but for something Rome tried desperately to forget: successful rebellion against the empire itself. A Thracian soldier captured and enslaved, Spartacus found himself in the gladiator school of Lentulus Batiatus in Capua around 73 BC. Rather than accept his fate, he organized approximately 70 fellow gladiators in a daring escape. Armed with kitchen implements and whatever weapons they could seize, they fought their way out and fled to Mount Vesuvius. What happened next shocked Rome. Thousands of escaped slaves joined them, attracted by the possibility of freedom. Spartacus proved to be a brilliant military commander. His growing army defeated Roman force after Roman force. At its peak, his rebellion numbered perhaps 100,000 men, former slaves, gladiators, and desperate poor, challenging the might of the most powerful empire in the world. For 2 years, Spartacus led his army across Italy, winning battle after battle against legions sent to destroy them. The Senate couldn't comprehend how slaves and gladiators could defeat trained Roman soldiers, but Spartacus kept proving them wrong. Finally, in 71 BC, Marcus Licinius Crassus assembled a massive force of 50,000 men. In the final battle in southern Italy, Spartacus died, fighting, refusing to surrender. Rome's revenge was swift and brutal. 6,000 captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way, their bodies left to rot as warnings. Yet Spartacus's legacy endured, becoming a symbol of resistance against tyranny that still resonates today. If Spartacus represents rebellion against the system, Flamma represents something far stranger: complete acceptance, even love, of the arena. His real name is lost to history. Flamma meant flame, a battle name he earned through skill and survival. A Syrian soldier captured and forced into gladiatorial combat, Flamma fought as a secutor, heavily armored, wielding gladius and shield, his helmet's smooth egg shape designed to prevent nets from catching. His tombstone, discovered in Sicily and erected by his companion Delicatus, records an extraordinary career: 34 fights over roughly 13 years. He won 21, fought to draws in 9, and lost 4 times honorably, receiving missio each time. But here's what makes Flamma's story astonishing. He was offered the rudus, the wooden sword symbolizing freedom, 4 separate times. 4 times, he refused. 4 times, he chose to remain a gladiator rather than accept liberation. We can only speculate why. Perhaps he was addicted to the fame, the crowd's roar, the thrill of combat. Perhaps he had developed no other skills and feared life outside. Perhaps the Familia Gladiatoria was the only family he knew. Perhaps the arena, for all its brutality, gave him purpose and identity that freedom couldn't match. He died at age 30, killed in combat, a champion who chose blood and sand over liberation. Carpophorus fought animals, not men, but his legend equals any gladiators. A bestiarius, he specialized in combat against wild beasts, a role with even lower life expectancy than regular gladiatorial fighting. During the Colosseum's inaugural games in 80 AD, Carpophorus became legendary. On the first day alone, he defeated a bear, a leopard, and a lion in succession. Later that same day, he killed a rhinoceros with a single spear thrust, a feat that amazed even jaded Roman crowds. The poet Martial, who witnessed these games, wrote that if Carpophorus had lived in mythical times, he could have single-handedly slain the Hydra and Chimera. On another occasion, Carpophorus allegedly killed 20 different animals in a single exhibition, demonstrating skills that earned him wealth few gladiators could dream of. Spiculus was Emperor Nero's personal favorite. He fought during the 60s AD and proved so impressive that Nero showered him with gifts, property, money, even a palace. This created the bizarre situation of a gladiator, technically a slave, living in luxury with servants of his own. When Nero faced rebellion and certain death in 68 AD, unable to bring himself to commit suicide, he reportedly called for Spiculus to kill him. But Spiculus either didn't receive the message or refused to come. Nero ultimately took his own life. After Nero's death, an angry mob formed, furious at anyone associated with the hated emperor. According to the historian Plutarch, They used toppled statues to crush Spiculus to death in the streets, his association with Nero transforming him from celebrated champion to victim of public rage. These famous fighters represent extremes of the gladiatorial experience: rebellion, acceptance, mastery, and favor. But thousands of other gladiators fought and died in relative anonymity, their names preserved only in brief graffiti or simple tombstones recording their records. Every famous champion represented hundreds of unknown fighters whose courage and suffering fed Rome's endless appetite for blood sport. Here's the contradiction that defined every gladiator's existence. You could be both the most celebrated person in Rome and legally unable to marry a citizen. Roman law classified gladiators as infames, literally, without fame or honor, though the term really meant without legal standing. They couldn't vote, couldn't hold office, couldn't testify in court except under torture, couldn't legally marry respectable citizens. They were segregated even in death, buried in separate cemeteries reserved for gladiators, actors, and prostitutes. Roman society grouped them with others who sold their bodies for public entertainment. The stigma was permanent and absolute. Yet simultaneously, successful gladiators achieved celebrity status that seems almost incomprehensible given their legal status. Graffiti across the empire celebrated their victories. Pottery, oil lamps, glass vessels bore images of famous fighters. Children played with gladiator figurines. Women, especially, seemed drawn to them. The physician Galen wrote disapprovingly of upper-class women who sent gifts to famous gladiators and requested private meetings. The satirist Juvenal told stories of high-born women running away with fighters, risking complete social ruin for romantic involvement. Whether exaggerated or based in sus, truth, these accounts reveal fascination that transcended official disgust. The economics were equally contradictory. Most gladiators earned little money. Prize winnings of 100 to 300 denarii per fight might seem substantial, but they fought only 2 or 3 times yearly, and most earnings went to owners or covered expenses. Yet exceptional cases defied this norm. Rudiarii, freed gladiators who chose to return to fighting, could negotiate their own terms and demand substantial appearance fees. One veteran gladiator during Emperor Tiberius's reign allegedly earned 100,000 sesterces for a single fight, more than a third of a senator's annual income, more than 1,000 soldiers' salaries. For the lanista who owned gladiator schools, the business required enormous capital investment, but could generate substantial returns. A single gladiator might cost 1,000 denarii to purchase and train, but could be rented out repeatedly for 100 to 300 denarii per appearance. The risk came from death or serious injury, which could wipe out the investment instantly. This is why contracts often specified that if a rented gladiator was killed, the sponsor would pay full market value, potentially 50 times the rental fee. The greatest prize a gladiator could win was a simple wooden training sword. The rudis symbolized freedom, presented publicly by the editor sponsoring the games. Receiving it typically required years of exceptional performance, courage, skill, entertainment value that made the gladiator more valuable as a symbol than as a continuing fighter. But freedom brought unexpected complications. The stigma of having been a gladiator never completely vanished. Former fighters struggled to find respectable employment or social acceptance. Many became trainers at gladiator schools, using their expertise to teach the next generation. Others worked as referees, bodyguards, or enforcers. Some opened businesses, their fame providing commercial advantage. But the peshes. Respectability of ordinary citizenship remained elusive. Roman society couldn't quite forget what they had been. Perhaps this explains why some gladiators, having won freedom, chose to return to the arena. These rudiarii fought as free professionals, earning substantial money for continued performances. The crowd loved them because they represented choice, men who fought purely for glory rather than under compulsion. Based on the historical evidence, This suggests that for some fighters, the arena provided meaning that freedom couldn't match. Better to die in the sand, honored and remembered, than fade into obscurity as social outcasts struggling to survive. The Rudis itself was more than just symbol. Freed gladiators were supposed to carry it at all times as proof of status. Without it, they could theoretically be re-enslaved. The wooden sword became a kind of passport, declaring, "I earned my freedom through blood and courage, and you cannot take it from me." Yet how many gladiators, walking Rome's streets with that wooden sword hanging at their side, felt truly free? For nearly 1,000 years, gladiatorial combat defined Roman entertainment. But by the 3rd century AD, the empire faced mounting pressures. Constant warfare, inflation, and political instability strained resources. Maintaining amphitheaters, schools, and the supply chains for animals and equipment became increasingly difficult. The games declined in quality and frequency. Christian opposition grew as Christianity spread. Church leaders condemned gladiatorial combat as murder, arguing it violated principles of mercy and the sanctity of life. After Constantine's conversion in the 4th century, this religious opposition translated into political pressure. In 325 AD, Constantine issued an edict discouraging gladiatorial games. In 399 AD, Emperor Honorius officially banned gladiator fights, though enforcement was inconsistent and the ban had to be repeated in 404 AD. According to the chronicler Theodoret, writing in the 5th century, a monk named Telemachus rushed into the arena during games in Rome in 404 AD and attempted to separate two fighting gladiators, pleading for the violence to stop. The crowd, enraged by his interference, stoned him to death. Emperor Honorius, horrified, immediately issued a final, definitive ban. Whether this story is literally true or embellished legend, it captures a historical truth. The games ended because society's values had changed. Animal hunts continued for another century, finally ending around 523 AD. The Colosseum gradually fell into disrepair. Medieval Romans used it as a quarry, taking stone to build churches and palaces. The building that once held 50,000 screaming spectators became a fortress, then a pasture, eventually a romantic ruin. Yet the memory persisted. The gladiators have become symbols, their real historical complexity reduced to simple archetypes. The rebel, the champion, the slave finding dignity, combat. The archaeological evidence continues to emerge. Tombstones, graffiti, the physical remains of schools and cemeteries. Each discovery adds detail to our understanding of these warriors who lived at the intersection of slavery and celebrity, brutality and skill, death and glory. We can calculate mortality rates, analyze their diet, reconstruct training methods, study weapons and armor. But we cannot truly understand what it felt like to stand in the arena, to hear the crowds roar, to know that in moments you might die, or kill, or both. We can only remember that these were real people, whose lives and deaths shaped one of history's most powerful civilizations. The sand has been silent for 1,500 years, but the stories remain, carved in stone, written in blood, preserved in the collective memory of a civilization that rose to greatness partly through the courage and suffering of men forced to fight for others' entertainment. If you found this journey through ancient Rome's most brutal profession compelling, please consider subscribing to Sleepable History. We explore the forgotten corners of the past with the same depth and care, bringing you closer to the people who lived these extraordinary stories. Thank you for listening, and may your own battles, whatever they may be, find you standing when the dust settles.